So that portion is done. Now we are pretty good about ANS, right? This unit has 3 sections: ANS, blood and endocrine. Going to the blood section. This is a relatively simple portion, but questions have been asked. First we'll see what hematinics are. Hematinics are compounds required for the formation of blood, and they are used to treat anemias. The hematinics we are going to study are iron, vitamin B12 and folic acid or vitamin B9. About iron, these are some basic things but important things. There are some compounds which increase the absorption of iron. One is ascorbic acid or vitamin C, 2 is amino acids, 3 is meat, and 4 is acidity of the gastric juice or gastric acidity. All these can increase the absorption of iron. So if you consume lemon along with iron, it is going to increase the absorption of your iron. Similarly, amino acids, meat and gastric acidity. The compounds or the conditions which can decrease the absorption of iron are antacids. Gastric acidity will increase absorption, right? So antacids are the compounds which will reduce the acidity of the gastric juice. So this decreases the absorption. Then phosphates, phytates, tetracyclines and presence of food in the stomach. Again, when you have food, the acidity of your stomach is going to reduce. So that reduces the absorption. Phosphates and phytates are 2 compounds that reduces the absorption. Phytate is present in tea. So if you consume tea along with a diet containing iron, it is going to reduce the absorption of the iron. Then tetracyclines are also going to reduce the absorption. Now iron is transported with the help of transferrin. The term trans is there. So transportation is with transferrin. That is one important question. One more is the storage form. How iron is stored. When it is transported as transferrin, it is stored as ferritin and hemosiderin. 2 storage forms are there, ferritin and hemosiderin. Now in iron deficiency, you can supplement iron. You can give it orally or parenterally. Oral iron preparations are, there are 6 preparations: ferrous sulfate, ferrous fumarate, ferrous gluconate, ferrous succinate, iron calcium complex and ferric ammonium citrate. So what did you notice from this? Most of the preparations are ferrous preparations. So ferrous salts are better absorbed. So the oral preparations all will be ferrous compounds, and you have iron calcium complex also. Then you have ferric ammonium citrate. That is one preparation with the ferric prefix. Parenteral preparations are iron dextran, iron sorbitol, citrate complex. So in oral preparation you had iron calcium complex. Okay, parenteral ones are iron dextran and iron sorbitol citric acid complex. Out of this iron dextran preparation you can give IV as well as IM, intravenously or intramuscularly. But iron sorbitol citrate complex is given only IM, because when you give it IV, it will quickly saturate the transferrin stores. So it will cause toxicity. So what you should remember is which all are the oral preparations, which all are the parenteral preparation. Most of the ferrous salts are oral. Then you have ferric ammonium citrate, then iron calcium complex. Parenteral ones are iron dextran, iron sorbitol citrate. Coming to some questions asked from vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 deficiency will affect the synthesis of blood. So vitamin B12 deficiency may be due to, one is Addisonian pernicious anemia. It is called Addisonian disease because Thomas Addison was the first person to describe anemias which are not responding to iron. That is how he found the B12 deficiency is causing the anemia. This is due to the deficiency of intrinsic factor because of the destruction of the parietal cells of the stomach. So you have an extrinsic factor and you have an intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor, also known as intrinsic factor of Castle, is a glycoprotein, and our extrinsic factor is vitamin B12. Intrinsic factor produced by the parietal cell is required for the absorption of the extrinsic factor or B12. So when parietal cells are destroyed, there is no intrinsic factor, there is no absorption of vitamin B12. Other causes are gastrectomy or chronic gastritis, then malabsorption of the vitamin, or due to the presence of fish tapeworm. Here the supplement preparations are cyanocobalamin and hydroxocobalamin. Cyanocobalamin can be given IM or deep SC, subcutaneously. Deep you can give. Hydroxocobalamin is having a longer lasting effect when compared to cyanocobalamin. Coming to vitamin B9 or folic acid. Where in the body is folic acid absorbed is an important question. It has been asked. It is absorbed in duodenum and jejunum, and it's stored in the liver, just like vitamin B12. B12 is also stored in liver. B9 shows a lot of interactions. The presence of many drugs can induce the deficiency of B9. Examples are phenytoin, Phenobarbital, oral contraceptives, methotrexate, trimethoprim, all these can induce folate deficiency. So how you will remember this? Folic acid deficiency is induced by all these drugs. So we fall after we met the top. So folic acid deficiency is induced by met top. Met is for methotrexate, and then you have trimethoprim, oral contraceptives, phenytoin, phenobarbital. This is also an important question. We have already discussed this in the cancer chemotherapy. Folinic acid or citrovorin factor or leucovorin is the active coenzyme form of folic acid. Okay, so active coenzyme form of folic acid is N-formyl tetrahydrofolic acid or folinic acid. We already know that B9 and methotrexate are enemies. So when folinic acid is present, it can overcome methotrexate toxicity. Similarly, when methotrexate is there, it can inhibit the absorption of B9. After hematinics, we are going to anticoagulants. Anticoagulants are also important. So you would have heard many anticoagulant names like lepidolin, danaparoid, all these. So I want to make it clear what is each anticoagulant. Let's go to the classification. It is classified into anticoagulants used in vivo and those used in vitro. In vivo means it is used in our body directly. In vitro means it is used in laboratories. So in vivo class, you have fast acting and slow acting. Fast acting anticoagulants group constitute heparin, low molecular weight heparin, and heparinoids. And heparinoids are heparin sulfate, danaparoid, and lepidolin. Clear with that? Then there are slow acting anticoagulants or those which are used orally. These are coumarin derivatives and indandione derivatives. Coumarin derivatives are bis-hydroxycoumarin, warfarin sodium, and nicomalone. So the commonly heard name warfarin is a coumarin derivative. Then indandione derivatives are easy to remember, phenindione and diphenadione. So that dione name will help you to identify. That is also a slow acting one. Now the anticoagulants used in vitro are heparin. Heparin is common. It can be used in vivo and in vitro. Then citrates and oxalates. Then sodium edetate. All these are used in vitro. Heparin is the strongest acid in the body. So it is a strongest acid in the body. What it does, there is a physiological reaction happening in our body, that is antithrombin 3 inhibits activated thrombin factor 9 and factor 10. So physiologically this is happening whenever thrombin factor 9 and factor 10 are activated to facilitate the clotting process. Antithrombin 3 can inhibit this process. Heparin, what it does, it speeds up this reaction to 1000 folds. So what happens? Heparin catalyzes this reaction and again leaving behind heparin and inactivated thrombin factor 9 and factor 10. So clotting is not happening. When given intravenously, we have an immediate onset of action. It reaches a peak in 5 to 10 minutes and then the clotting time will return to normal in 2 to 4 hours. So it is for immediate effect. We have low molecular weight heparin. What it does, it inactivates activated factor 10 alone. It will not affect 9 and activated thrombin. The next one is hirudin. Hirudin is a powerful thrombin inhibitor and it is found in the salivary gland of leeches. You know, if you get a leech bite, it will bleed. It is because it has a powerful thrombin inhibitor in its saliva. Next is lepidolin. Lepidolin is a recombinant compound. It is produced by recombinant DNA technology and it is used in patients who are allergic to heparin. Danaparoid is a mixture of heparinoids and it also acts by inhibiting factor 10A, just like our low molecular weight heparin. What does the term oid mean? It means similar. So heparinoid means molecules similar to heparin. Coming to a very important question, it has been asked repeatedly, what is the antagonist of heparin? Protamine sulfate is the antagonist of heparin. So a funny thing is, protamine sulfate also has anticoagulant activity just like our heparin. So it is obtained from the sperm of certain fish. Protamine sulfate, heparin antagonist, is obtained from the sperm of certain fish. Given intravenously, it can neutralize heparin. 1 milligram of protamine sulfate is enough for 100 units of heparin. So protamine sulfate is a basic protein which binds with the acidic group of heparin. This forms a stable complex which is not having any anticoagulant activity. But the molecule protamine sulfate per se has anticoagulant activity. Okay, clear? Now we'll see warfarin. Warfarin acts like this. It acts by inhibiting the gamma carboxylation of glutamate in factors 2, 7, 9 and 10. So when heparin was inhibiting factors 9, 10 and thrombin, warfarin is inhibiting factors 2, 7, 9, 10, that too by inhibiting the gamma carboxylation of the glutamate residues in these factors. This gamma carboxylation is essential for coagulation. Its anticoagulant effect develops over 1 to 3 days because already circulating clotting factors in your body is unaffected by warfarin, whereas heparin will destroy the already circulating factors and its onset is very fast. And it takes 5 to 7 days for the PT to return to normal. In case of heparin, after you stop the drug, the clotting returns to normal in 2 to 4 hours. Here it takes almost 1 week. Coming to the antidote, this is also important. Specific antidote for warfarin is vitamin K1 oxide. How it acts as a antidote? Because it allows the synthesis of the clotting factors which are destroyed by warfarin. So protamine sulfate is the antagonist for heparin. Vitamin K1 oxide is the antagonist of warfarin. So those were anticoagulants. Now we have something known as thrombolytics. They lyse the clot or they lyse the thrombus by activating the natural fibrinolytic system. So there is a natural fibrinolytic system in our body. This is activated by the thrombolytics. What are the thrombolytics? Streptokinase, urokinase, alteplase, eryteplase. These drugs are belonging to the thrombolytic group. Coming to antifibrinolytics. So we said there is a natural fibrinolytic system in our body. So there is a opposing factor, that is antifibrinolytic. They inhibit the plasminogen activation and they prevent the fibrinolysis. So the clots are not lysed in our body. So this favors the clotting. Such drugs are IACA or epsilon aminocaproic acid and its analog tranexamic acid. So in bleeding disorders, if we give IACA or tranexamic acid to the patient, this will maintain the clot in the patient. The next class of drugs that we have to learn, the antiplatelet drugs. Antiplatelet drug means it affects the platelet functions like aggregation, activation or platelet plug formation. This falls into 5 classes. One is prostaglandin synthesis inhibitors, and that is our common antiplatelet drug aspirin. So aspirin is a prostaglandin synthesis inhibitor. Next is phosphodiesterase inhibitor or PDE inhibitor. Example is dipyridamole. So dipyridamole is also an antiplatelet drug. Its mechanism is by phosphodiesterase inhibition. Then you have ADP antagonists. These are the common drugs that patients tell us that they are taking. Clopidogrel, ticlopidin. These are ADP antagonists. Next one is glycoprotein 2B3A receptor antagonist. So this 2B3A receptor is important receptor of the platelet. It's antagonist. Such drugs are abcicimab, eptifibatide, tirofiban. So these are the newer agents. Most commonly ADP antagonists are prescribed for patients. Clopidogrel is the commonly given drug. Clopilet, you would have heard that brand name. So recently the glycoprotein 2B3A receptor antagonists are being prescribed. Drugs like abcicimab are largely being prescribed now. And in the others you can have the PGI or prostaglandin I2. Prostaglandin I2 is an antiplatelet agent. Let's see one more classification. It is about hypolipidemics or anti-cholesterol or cholesterol lowering agents. These falls into 4 classes. One is HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors. HMG-CoA reductase enzyme is important in cholesterol synthesis. So its inhibitor will reduce the cholesterol. These are the common agents that we have heard as cholesterol lowering agents. Statins. Lovastatin, simvastatin, pravastatin, atorvastatin. So statins. Second one is fibric acids. Fibric acids will have the fiber name in them. Gemfibrozil, clofibrate, fenofibrate. So that is easy to remember. So statins are HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors. Fibric acids, the name fiber will be there. Then you have bile acid binding resins like cholestyramine and cholecystipol. These are bile acid binding resins which will reduce your lipid levels. Finally, you have antioxidants like probucol. This is also a hypolipidemic. Coming to endocrine. What does endocrine means? It means there are some endocrine organs in our body which will give out its secretions called hormones. This travels through the blood and exerts its effect on the distant organs. So you have hypothalamus and you have pituitary. First we will see hypothalamic and pituitary hormones. Hypothalamus releases many hormones which will stimulate the anterior pituitary. There are 2 parts for pituitary, anterior and posterior. So hypothalamic hormones stimulate the the anterior pituitary to release some hormones. The first one is growth hormone releasing hormone. This will stimulate the anterior pituitary to secrete growth hormone. And there is something called growth hormone releasing inhibiting hormone from the hypothalamus. This will inhibit the release of growth hormone. Second one is corticotropin releasing factor, which will help anterior pituitary to release corticotropin. Then again thyrotropin releasing hormone, which acts on the anterior pituitary to release thyroid stimulating hormone or TSH. GnRH or gonadotropin releasing hormone is there. It is also known as somatorelin. It will help anterior pituitary to release two hormones, FSH and LH, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. Prolactin releasing factor releases prolactin. Then prolactin release inhibiting factor inhibits the release of prolactin. MSH or melanocyte stimulating hormones releasing factor stimulates pituitary to release MSH or melanocyte stimulating hormone. So growth hormone regulates growth, then corticotropin stimulates the adrenal gland. So that is a three-way now from hypothalamus to pituitary. Now this hormone will stimulate the adrenal gland. Then thyrotropin releasing hormone stimulated pituitary to secrete TSH. This will act on the next gland, thyroid, for the release of T3 and T4. Follicle stimulating hormone, it will stimulate the ovum and the ovarian follicle, helps in gametogenesis in males as well as females. Luteinizing hormone, it will stimulate ovulation in females and regulate testosterone secretion in males. Prolactin is for development of the breast and lactation, and MSH is for melanin synthesis. So that's clear, I think. That was about anterior pituitary. Now there is a posterior part of pituitary which will release two hormones, oxytocin and ADH. Oxytocin is involved in smooth muscle contractions. So if someone asks you which hormone is involved in release of breast milk, it is oxytocin. Because for release of the breast milk, you need smooth muscle contraction. For production, it is prolactin, but for release, it is oxytocin. ADH is anti-diuretic hormone. So clear with that, hypothalamus, anterior pituitary and posterior pituitary. Now we know about hypothalamus, anterior pituitary and posterior pituitary. Then we have the thyroid gland, which produces the hormones T3, T4 and calcitonin. Pancreas produces two primary hormones, insulin and glucagon. Insulin, which suppresses the glucose, and glucagon, which increases the blood glucose. Parathyroid gland produces parathyroid hormone, obviously. Then you have the gonads, the testis and the ovary, which produces the sex hormones. There is estrogen, there is progesterone and there is androgen. These are the hormones produced by the gonads. Then you have the adrenal gland. The adrenal gland has two parts, as you can see from the figure. The cortex, that is the outer portion, and the medulla, that is the core. The cortex has three layers: zona glomerulosa, zona fasciculata and zona reticularis. You can remember that using GFR. GFR is glomerular filtration rate, right? So zona glomerulosa, fasciculata and reticularis, from outside to inside. Then what are the secretions of each layer? This is an important question. Zona glomerulosa secretes mineralocorticoids, fasciculata secretes glucocorticoids, and reticularis secretes androgens. So how I remember this is, I remember GFR mega. So GFR is for zona glomerulosa, fasciculata and reticularis, and in the same order mega, MGA, mineralocorticoids, glucocorticoids and androgens. The medulla or the core portion secretes are catecholamines. Now we know the glands and the secretions. Now let us see the drugs that can act for and against these hormones. One is GHRH or growth hormone releasing hormone. Its analog is sermorelin. Sermorelin is an analog of the growth hormone releasing hormone. Somatostatin or growth hormone releasing inhibiting hormone is there. Its analog is octreotide. So that will inhibit the growth. Thyrotropin is there. Its analog is protirelin. GnRH or gonadotropin releasing hormone analogs are relin drugs: buserelin, leuprorelin, goserelin, nafarelin. We have already learned this in cancer chemotherapy. And ADH analogs are desmopressin, terlipressin and felipressin. ADH or anti-diuretic hormone acts as vasoconstrictor, or they press the blood vessels. So these drugs name end with pressin: desmopressin, terlipressin, felipressin. Okay. Coming to thyroid gland. For hypothyroidism, we replace thyroid hormone or thyroxine. The levothyroxine form is given. For hyperthyroidism, we have to give antithyroid drugs. Antithyroid drugs are Thiouracils like propylthiouracil, methimazole, carbimazole. Then we have iodine, iodates and radioactive iodine, because thyroid hormone is formed by the iodination of the tyrosine residues, right? So these are the drugs used in hypothyroidism. Out of this, the carbimazole is the prodrug of methimazole, or carbimazole gets converted to methimazole and exerts its effects. This can cross the placenta and it is also secreted in the milk. The better one is propylthiouracil, which is longer acting also, and it is the very little of it crosses the placenta and only a negligible fraction reaches the milk. Now, insulin and oral hypoglycemics. As you all know, insulin can be used to treat all the types of diabetes mellitus. The type 1 and type 2, which are the most common ones. Type 1 is called insulin dependent diabetes mellitus, and type 2 is non-insulin dependent. Type 2 is non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus. So in type 1, you definitely have to give insulin. In type 2, you can give oral hypoglycemics also, because all the beta islets of pancreas are not destroyed. These oral hypoglycemic agents can stimulate the pancreas to produce insulin. So let us see the classification of oral hypoglycemics now. The first class is called sulfonylureas. There are two generations of sulfonylureas. The first generation drugs are amide drugs, tolbutamide, chlorpropamide, acetohexamide, tolazamide. All these are first generation sulfonylureas. In the second generation drugs, all the drugs are gly drugs, glibenclamide, glypizide, glyclazide, glimepiride. So in the second generation, there is a amide drug, glibenclamide, but you won't get confused because that also starts with gly. So that is sulfonylureas. Now, biguanides. Biguanide drugs are fenformin and metformin. The common preparation that you have heard as a oral hypoglycemic will be metformin, right? So that belongs to the biguanide group. The third group is meglitinide. Meglitinide is easy to remember. The glinide term is there. So meglitinide has glinide in them, repaglinide and natiglinide. Then you have thiazolidinediones. Thiazolidinediones are glitazones, troglitazone, rosiglitazone, pioglitazone. Then you have alpha glucosidase inhibitors. These are acarbose and miglitol. So that is about the classification of oral hypoglycemics. Now we know which all drugs belong to which all groups. Now very briefly just see the mechanism of action. Sulfonylureas, they can do 3-4 things. One is stimulating the release of insulin from the beta islets of pancreas. Then sensitivity of peripheral tissues to this insulin is also increased. It also increases the number of insulin receptors which can detect insulin. And finally, it suppresses gluconeogenesis from the liver. So by all these 4 mechanisms, sulfonylureas can bring down glucose levels. Next is biguanides. Biguanides have insulin-like effect on tissues. What is the effect of insulin? Taking up of glucose into the cells. So biguanides have insulin-like effect on tissues. Meglitinides are insulin secretagogues. That is the first mechanism of sulfonylureas. It increases the insulin secretion from beta cells of pancreas. So meglitinides are secretagogues, or they stimulate the insulin secretion. Then you have thiazolidinediones. Thiazolidinediones have a different mechanism from all these. That is, you should remember, they are agonist of the PPAR gamma receptors. PPAR is peroxisome proliferator activated receptor. They also increases the insulin sensitivity. Then there is alpha glucosidase inhibitor, which can competitively inhibit alpha glucosidase enzyme. So clear from the name itself, alpha glucosidase inhibitor will inhibit alpha glucosidase enzyme. Each of these drugs can have its own side effects, but what is very important for you and what has been repeatedly asked is fenformin. Fenformin's use can cause lactic acidosis. So, fenformin is not used commonly now. It is being replaced by metformin, which does not show lactic acidosis. That is an important question. Okay, fenformin shows lactic acidosis. Finally, some drugs influencing estrogen. So we have 2 classes. One is SERMs, or selective estrogen receptor modulators. They modulate the estrogen receptors. You are familiar with these drugs. These are phen drugs, tamoxifen, raloxifene, torimifene. Okay, so these are the selective estrogen receptor modulators. They act like estrogen. Then you have anti-estrogen. Anti-estrogens are stains and zoles drugs. Stains are Fomeastane and exemestane. Then you have zole drugs, anastrozole, letrozole, vorazole. So anti-estrogens are stains and zoles. Selective estrogen receptor modulators are tamoxifen, raloxifene and torimifene. So that is all. I have concised to the maximum. So you may find names that are not included in this presentation. If you have any doubt, feel free to contact me. Okay, thank you.